Let me ask you, if you could, Rick, to just segue to another very consequential issue for our sovereignty. That is a matter on which you, again, have been a leader, namely this notion that we will see President Obama derogate again a control that the United States enjoys, a very important feature of American power at the moment, namely its ability to regulate aspects of that are really essential to the functioning of the Internet. What on earth is that about, Rick?
Well, it's not really that complicated, although anytime you talk about how the Internet works, people's eyes glaze over. So I'll try to make it real simple. When people get a website, it has a name on it, like it could be frankgaffney.com. Okay? But what that really is a series of numbers and symbols that extend for a very long time, and a organization actually sits there and says, okay, we're going to take these symbols and numbers and we're going to translate that in. So if you type in frankgaffney.com, you get Frank Gaffney's podcast or whatever it is. So that's how the Internet is organized, so we can find stuff on the Internet. That function is a function that the U.S. government owns and developed. And it is a function that really made the Internet work. So the U.S. government controls that function. The way they manage it is they vend it out to a group called ICANN, managing that function, developing, making it better, making it work better. But there's this group called ICANN that is a nonprofit C3 group, tax deductible contribution type of group, that is in fact managing that contract for the U.S. government. The President Obama wants to give the actual underlying power of the contract and say the U.S. government is no longer going to hold this contract. We're going to give it to ICANN in toto. So they not only are managing it, but they're owning it. That's significant for two reasons. Number one, it's significant because if you're owning the naming conventions, which is what that's called, you're controlling the naming conventions. The only First Amendment protections of those naming conventions are based in the very root that the U.S. government, it's their property, it's our property as citizens of the U.S. government. Hence, it has First Amendment protection. If ICANN controls it, then there are no First Amendment protections, just as if Facebook decides they don't want certain kind of speech on Facebook, they can say, we don't want that speech, and there's nothing you can do because that's a private property. And that's the way it ought to be. That's the way it ought to be. That's the way we've been designed. So it's important to maintain the U.S. government underlying protections and control the property, because otherwise there are no First Amendment protections for U.S. citizens as it relates to activity on the Internet and the capacity of being censored and having your URL, your name knocked off the Internet. And that isn't going to happen tomorrow. It's something that happens downstream.
But Rick, let me just say, we have to pause again for a moment, but when we come back, I want to see why you think that might be reason for concern, whether there are, in fact, people that we know of, countries that we know of, that are very anxious to deny freedom of speech. That and more with Rick Manning of Americans for Limited Government right after this.
Go to securefreedomradio.org today. It's your freedom. It's your country. Frank Gaffney's Secure Freedom Radio. Go to securefreedomradio.org today. It's your freedom. It's your country. Frank Gaffney's Secure Freedom Radio.
We're back for the final installment of our very special edition of Secure Freedom Radio, drilling down on challenges, indeed threats, to the sovereignty of the United States and the freedoms of the American people. We're discussing that with Rick Manning, the president of Americans for Limited Government. Rick, you were talking a bit about freedom of speech, and I think all of us who use and benefit from the Internet, and that's just about all of us these days, I guess, take for granted, kind of like oxygen, that we'll be able to say and do pretty much anything we want on the Internet. There are some rules, and as you say, there's the Yahoos and the Googles and the Twitters that are now increasingly, trying to exercise certain restrictions on speech. But what else is at work here? Who else is interested in trying to curb what is said or done or allowed to be known through the Internet? And why does this kind of idea of transferring control to so-called international stakeholders potentially empower their efforts?
The answer is relatively simple. At the outset, the whole justification for urging the U.S. to transfer the thing is based on concerns by foreign countries about U.S. activities related to Edward Snowden. So foreign countries believed that they would be the U.S. could manipulate the data to their detriment, and as a result, they demanded that it be transferred off. President Obama agreed to that, is pushing that as a result. So it tells you that there is real power related to that. We know a couple of things. We know that an Intel representative, a company, testified before Congress a week and a half ago that there were trade ramification threats being made against their company should the transfer not occur. So it's important enough that big countries are actually threatening U.S. corporations that if the transfer doesn't occur, they're going to have trade ramifications. Two, the ICANN itself has opened up an office in China in the same building as the very agency in China that censors the Internet. So ICANN is paying rent to the Chinese government and is literally in the Internet censorship building. So that wasn't a mistake. It was a mistake, but it wasn't by accident. And it just shows you the real challenge that faces if you turn this over to ICANN, and they are allowed to operate as a free operator, not under government aegis, U.S. government aegis. There is no going back once that occurs, and that's why this is a very dangerous thing, and Congress needs to act to stop it from occurring on September 30th, 2016.
So let's talk about what can be done by Congress, and specifically, what can we who still have some measure of influence on them, particularly in an election season, do to try to assure that Congress does, in fact, prevent this giveaway of American national property, which it would seem would require congressional action and if it's to take place.
Congress has defunded the Obama administration's efforts to transition the Internet the past 2 years. What they need to do is they need to affirmatively reassert that the Internet transfer will not occur. They need to put it onto either a legislation that the president will sign or put it within a funding bill and make it, and not just a defund, but rather affirmatively assert that they cannot transfer the Internet for a set period of time. There's lots of arguments about why they should not, and violations of the law that the Obama administration has made in the transfer. They've ignored the defunds and have proceeded ahead, contrary to congressional will. But the truth is, that's why they can't just say, we're defunding it. They have to say, you will not transfer the Internet, control of the Internet over to ICANN, and force Obama to affirmatively break the law in terms of with no ambiguity. So there's a court case that will be able to be, where it'll be defeated in.
Well, so what you're saying is they have to date acted to impede this. But the problem is that legislative prohibition on the transfer expires at the end of this fiscal year, and they therefore need to take affirmative action in order to prevent it from happening thereafter, which is, I guess, the administration's plan?
Yeah, absolutely. The transition is set to occur on October 1. As soon as the ICANN contract runs out with the U.S. government, they just won't renew the contract. Instead, they'll just turn over the function to ICANN. To make it, it's been worse than what you described. The administration has affirmatively been spending money to push the transfer forward, even though Congress said they were not allowed to. So they have affirmatively violated Congress's power of the purse, and over the past 2 years, and that's one of the, if nothing else, that's the reason why Congress should stop it, because otherwise the power of the purse means nothing.